You're listening to the Love Over Addiction podcast.
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us and sharing your story. I am particularly excited to have you on because I know enough about your story to know it is going to help a lot of women listening today. So thank you for being willing.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm so happy that I can share and really pay it forward to our sisters here. I've heard you interview other women, and every time I thought, I want to be interviewed someday. I want to share my story. I want to help people. So thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, and I love that today's the day. It happened. And you've got quite the story. So let's start from the beginning, which is, how did you meet your ex-husband, your now ex-husband, and when did you feel like were the first signs that something might not be right with the drinking?
Good question. Yeah, so there was a huge time span, I think, between then and then. So we met because we worked for the same company, and I was looking for a running partner. And I noticed that he was a runner at the company gym, and I approached him just as a friend so that we could run outside. And so we were friends for about 6 months before we even began dating. And we dated about 2 years before we married, and then we were married for 6 years before I noticed something was different. And so I didn't know when I married him that I had married a man who struggles with alcohol. And probably because he hid it from me. He's a closet drinker. And he was earlier in the progression of his disease, so I think he was able probably at times to hold off from drinking for long periods of time. And then a significant event happened 6 years into our marriage. His father passed away suddenly and tragically. And then I started to see things. And I didn't grow up with addiction in my immediate family, so I had zero exposure to it. And I didn't know what it looked like or what it sounded like or anything. And so I was completely naive to addiction. And so when I did start seeing signs in him, I didn't attribute it to alcohol. And his thing was alcohol. He didn't use drugs. He didn't have other addictions that I was aware of. And, but I wasn't even attributing the things that I was seeing to alcohol because I was so unaware at the time of addiction and what that was. And, even when we were dating, I remember having this conversation with him because I had dated a couple of men that I thought drank too much. And I ultimately broke it off with them. And I remember telling my future, husband that would be my deal breaker. If a guy drinks too much like that, that's my deal breaker. And I remember him listening to that. And then me not knowing that he was probably struggling with this all along, and that it was running almost like quiet software in the background of our life, and I'm not aware of it in any way. And,
so how did you become aware? Was there a specific moment where it kind of clicked?
So it took me a long time, but there was sort of a funny moment that I should tell you that didn't click, because I think there's something of value in it. My husband traveled for a living, and so I worked. I came home from work one night, and it was like a 10-hour work day, and I was exhausted. And we had a dog, and I knew I had to walk the dog, and I knew I had to like get dinner on the table, and I knew I had all these things to do, and I'm still like in my heels from work, and I need to take out the trash. And I go out to the garage where our cans are, and I trip on something that's on the ground, and I go flying, and I catch myself on the hood of the car. So, and I'm like, oh goodness, what was that? And I look down, and I see a brown paper shopping bag, like full-size bag filled with liquor bottles, empty bottles, right in front of the recycling bin. And my state of mind is important here. So I'm in a hurry. I'm stressed out. I've had a long day at work. I need to walk the dog. I trip over this thing, and I look down, and I see all that, and I think, oh, we didn't have a party this week. Why are all these bottles here? And even if we did, this isn't what we drink. We drink beer and wine when we have people over. And it was like a 2-second thought. And the next thought was, I don't have time for this. Because I'm so stressed about my life, everything else. And I literally just lean over. I pick up the bag and I toss it into recycling and I take out the trash. And I didn't think about it again for a whole year. Like, I totally wiped it out of my memory. Like, I was like, I don't have time to deal with this. And I think that was really important because that's like the mentality I was approaching this with. I'm starting to see signs with him, but I don't have time for this. I don't want to deal with this. So I'm in like a state of denial. And I was also seeing, like, you know, he would like lean over to leash our dog, to take the dog for a walk, and he couldn't hook the leash. And my husband's falling over, and, you know, and I'm like, what is going on? And I got really worried one night. I knew that a family member had given him sleeping pills because he was having a hard time sleeping. And I asked him if he was taking the pills too early in the evening, and that they were like knocking him out. That's what I thought was going on. The furthest thing from my mind that he would be doing this to himself, drinking, because he was very health-minded. He was careful about what he ate. He hit the gym every day. He took these fitness classes, those like hardcore core training classes that like are like military style boot camp kind of stuff. And I just couldn't believe that this person would be drinking like this. And then finally, I was really putting it together because he wasn't coming to bed at night. And I would go downstairs, I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and he wasn't there. He wasn't in our room. And I was worried about him. And I'd go downstairs and I would find him passed out in front of the TV. And the cocktail glass was still in his hand, like he's clenching the glass, but he's completely passed out. And I would take the glass out of his hand so that it wouldn't spill. And then I started to realize, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's drinking every night. That's what's going on. And for 2 years, because I did not have your program and I didn't know, I was trying to get him to confess that he had a problem at that point, and he would not confess. And I finally got this. The story is almost funny, but we were traveling to visit his family, and we're staying in a hotel room, and this is where I caught him for good. He left early to go to his mother's house, and it's summer, and I pull out my pair of shorts, and I put them on, and it's a pair of shorts that needs a belt to stay up, and I realized I forgot my belt. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a long day. My pants are going to be falling down. And I realized, I'm like, oh, you know what? He'll have a belt in his suitcase. And he's gone. And I open up his suitcase just to grab a belt. And instead, I find the biggest bottle of vodka I've ever seen in my life. Like plastic, giant, like, I don't know if this is like what you get at Costco or what, when you want like value pricing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the biggest thing I've ever seen. It's just sitting there in his suitcase, and he hasn't confessed to me. And so I grab a belt and I go to his mother's house. His whole family is there, and I am livid. I am beside myself. And he's like, hey, and I walk in the door and I said, hey, I just want you to know I borrowed your belt. And his face dropped and he turned white as a ghost. And I still have photos from that day. Every photo, he is white as a ghost because he knows he's caught. And the irony of the whole thing was after that visit with his family, we had plans to go visit the local wineries to wine taste. And so we are driving through wine country having a conversation about his alcohol problem. The irony of this is just so big. And we're pulling over and I'm tasting wine and now he's not. And what we're doing is we would buy like a big case of wine and give it to all our friends for Christmas. So it's really mostly for gifts. But I'm thinking this is just the weirdest thing. But at that point he agreed to get counseling. And that was 8 years, I believe, into our marriage. And he is admitting he has a problem and he's going to get help. And he did. He actually got help for about 3 years. He had a great counselor, got his life together, hit the gym harder, got in amazing shape. Alcohol appeared to be gone. But here's on my end, I'm thinking, because I still don't know anything about addiction really, I'm thinking that we're past the big problem. We're past the hurdle. Like, he's figured it out. Life is good. Everything's going to be fine. And I don't know what's in store for me here, but I just think that's it. It's done. It's over. And I'm not thinking that there's something I need to do for me. I don't have your program. I don't know at that time that I need to get prepared for the worst. And the worst started to happen about 3 years later. His counselor got very sick. His counselor got cancer and couldn't work anymore. And instead of finding a new counselor, my husband just stopped counseling. And at the same time, things got very challenging for him at work. And he was a high achiever at work, had a great job, was doing really well, but was just hitting into like what happens at work. Sometimes things get stressful at work, and they did. And it started to become apparent that he was going to need to change companies. And his condition just started to really spiral. And it was kind of scary. And I'm all the time, I don't have your program yet. And I'm just begging him to get help. And he's not doing it. And he seems to be getting worse. And at this point, he's just drinking in the evenings. And then the other part of that story is a couple years later, he gets a job offer, a really great job offer that's a promotion for him in another state on the other side of the country. And we're really excited about this. And he takes the job, and the company's going to pay for us to move, and we just need to list our house for sale and get the house ready. And here's another part where I think this is maybe where codependency was really starting to be a thing for me. I had a small business at this point, working for myself, and I put that aside to get our house ready to move, to manage the entire process of our cross-country move, so that he could work, so that we could focus on him succeeding in his job. So this is me just putting him first because he's the breadwinner, and this is really important, and all this, and me not realizing that I need to take care of me too. And by the time we got ourselves moved to the other state, and there was a point even before we moved, that I could see he was really struggling. I could see he was drinking every night. And I pulled him aside and I said, we don't have to move. Your new company's not in any hurry for you to get there. Or if if this job's really not working out for you, we can, get your resume together and get another job, like we don't have to do this. And he's like, no. He's like, he had great business acumen, really smart guy, very well respected in his industry. And he says, no, this is going to work out. And I trusted that because he was always right about stuff like that. And we went forward, got down to, our new state. We're staying now like in an Airbnb while I'm looking for a house for us to buy. And it's a 900 square foot tiny little cottage. So it's the two of us and our two dogs. And every night at 6 p.m., he's sober. And by about 6:15, he's passed out. And it's scaring the heck out of me because we're about to buy a house. He's got this new job. And like every night in a 10-minute period, he's completely gone. And in a 900 square foot cottage, I didn't know yet not to look for the alcohol. I could not find alcohol in a 900 square foot cottage, no matter how I tore the place apart and looked, because I was codependent and I'm trying to thinking that if I can get a hold of it, he'll stop or something. And it was kind of going off the rails, but we went forward because where we were in our new town, the housing market was outstanding. And I thought we almost can't lose money buying a house here. Like, if we hold on for 2 years, we'll do okay. And so with that understanding of the market, we went forward and bought a house. And unfortunately, in the 3 years that we were there in that town, his condition deteriorated. And in that time period, he lost 2 jobs. And I watched him just completely come apart. And the man who was smart and funny and just really good at what he did, he wasn't there anymore. And it was replaced by addiction. He was angry. He was rageful. We fought every night, like our screaming matches. I'm sure the neighbors could hear it. And I just started to get to a point I was exhausted by the whole thing. And one night he was out of town and I Googled alcoholic husband and I found your program. And at that point I was I don't know what to do. Like, I've tried to be good with him. I've tried yelling at him. I've tried motivating him. I've tried distracting him, which I did every night. Like, let's go for a walk, instead of you drink yourself into a stupor every night. And I had tried everything. I'm a helper person. I'm the kind of person that wants to participate if I can help him get well. I had no idea at that time that I can't help, that I can't do anything. There's nothing. All I can do is help myself. And I had been carrying this at that point for 10 years alone. Like, I had not told a soul. And because he's a closet drinker, no one in our life had ever seen him drunk. Like, if I brought him to a party, he would just nurse one beer all night. And then the minute we walked in the door of our house, he would just hit the vodka hard and be passed out within 20 minutes. And I hadn't told a soul, and I was completely alone, and I was completely exhausted by all of it. And just like the stress of, he's losing jobs. He had been well respected in his industry, and I was suspecting that he was starting to lose the jobs because maybe he was drinking on the job. And then he's looking for jobs and recruiters are calling and he's drunk and he's answering the phone drunk. And then I just knew that I'm like, oh my gosh, this isn't sustainable. Like, the life that we have and this amazing, beautiful home that we bought and his ability to work isn't there anymore. And me, having pretty much not been giving my business any attention for like a small handful of years. I'd been networking a lot where I was in my new city, but I had found myself not bringing on new clients because the truth was I didn't have room within myself to manage clients. Like I would go out and network, but I couldn't. The truth was that for me to work and to take on clients, like I was taking on too much already, like keeping all the balls of our life in the air. And I was exhausted and I was alone with it. And one day when I got really, really exhausted, I picked up the phone and I called one of my closest friends who lives on the other side of the country. And he was the first person that I told. And I literally like drove down the street in my car into a parking lot, way in the back of the lot, so that nobody, you know, I wouldn't get caught by my husband or whatever. And I told my friend what I had been dealing with for like 10 years at that point. And my friend was so kind and so beautiful with this, like holding space for me. And he just let me cry into the phone for about an hour and a half. And I, like, for our sisters here, I'm like, you know, I know some of you right now are trying to decide if you're going to tell anybody that you don't want to be alone anymore with this situation. Find that one friend who will love you no matter what. Like find that person who will hold space for you and just be with you. And this guy I knew had that capacity, and this friend. And he had actually grown up with addiction in his house as a child, so he knew exactly what I was dealing with. And just the relief of telling the one person, and then the next step was I was flying back home to see my family, and the next step was to tell my family so that I wouldn't be alone. And honestly, everyone was super supportive, but because no one had ever seen my husband drunk, it was really hard for my friends to believe this. And it was like, so, but your program was really preparing me for all of this. Like, it was really interesting because everyone that I talked to, I had a small inner circle, and it ended up being 7 people in my life, 5 friends and 2 family members who really carried me through this whole situation. And I remember sitting down and telling one of my good friends, and they all knew him really well, and they all liked him. He's a really likable guy. People adore him. He's a guy that people adore. And they're trying to comprehend that he could have this level of a problem when they've never seen it. They've never seen him act funny. And what I realized, because one of my friends, I told her, and she took it all in, and she goes, I really got to sit with this. And I'm like, absolutely respect that. And she came back to me like 3 times in the next 3 weeks to talk about it, because she felt the information was so hard for her to take in, like that she needed help processing it. You know, I'm the one that kind of needs help, but my friends are needing help processing it. And what I said to myself in that time frame was, if it took me 7 to 10 years to admit to myself that really there was a problem, I can't expect my friends to understand this in one conversation. And then I have to give them room to process this. In the case of that, they had no idea. And, but everybody was on board with me, and everybody was so supportive, and like combined with your program and my friends and, the work that I was doing on myself, I made it through this. And, I've been divorced for 21 months. And I had to think about it the other day when I knew I was planning to talk to you, Michelle, because I was like, oh my gosh, it's been that long already. And I'm all the way out on the other side. And I want to give hope to our sisters, like as some of you are thinking, you're trying to make a decision, you're trying to, you know, are you going to stay or go? or even how to handle, if you're staying or you're still living together, how to handle him, under the roof. And I wanted to share too, the first program I bought from you was Love Over Boundaries. And I wanted information immediately on how to handle, like when I get home at night, how do I deal with this man, because he and I were screaming at each other every night. And there was arguments every night, and they were horrible, and he would bait me, and it would just go on. And I got Love Over Boundaries, and I learned not to, like, if he's angry, leave the room. If his emotions seem unstable, I just got out of the room before anything even started. Or if he starts to argue, don't argue back. And I got that information right away. And what was really cool was, like, our house became a lot more peaceful. And 1 month in to applying what I had learned with you, in a dry moment, he comes over to me and he says, I want to thank you for not arguing with me anymore. And I was like, oh my gosh, like even he noticed. Like, I'm just, like, how to interact with him differently, like, and just the awareness that some of my codependent behaviors would exacerbate his condition. I'm not responsible for his condition, but that some of the things that I had been doing for 10 years were exacerbating his condition in one way or another. And for me to take responsibility for the part that I can control, which is me and how I behave and how I show up around him. And at that point, I didn't have any decisions made whether I was going to stay or go. It was more like, how can I just make my house more peaceful? And before then, I had tried a few Al-Anon meetings around town, and they were welcoming and everything, but one of the things that I picked up on really quickly there was that it wasn't going to be quick. Because there's no crosstalk, I wasn't going to get information quickly that I could apply immediately. And while there were women in the program who approached me after meetings and said, hey, we're going on a weekend retreat and you're welcome to join us, or, we're all going to lunch or something. And I thought, well, that's when I probably would be able to crosstalk and get information. But I was dealing with so much to like keep our lives on the rails at that point. Like the thought of like extending myself socially and spending whole weekends with people, I was like, I don't have time for that. Like, I just don't have time in my life. I'm trying to run a business. I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do next. And like, I know I'm going to have to list a house for sale. And I just don't have time to be like having lunch with people just to get little snippets of information. So Michelle, your program was so timely for me. It was just like, I can, go in to my worksheets at any time of the day or night and learn. I can listen to your podcast. I can listen to your videos any time of the day or the night. I can get support with your secret Facebook group when I needed it. And that was just so invaluable that like in the moment help that literally changed my life when I walked in the door at night. Like literally I could change my behavior with my boundaries, and that made a difference, and that our house could maybe be peaceful for a few nights, before he starts up again. And then just the guidance, like, then I bought the LOA program, and then eventually I bought the Stay or Go program. And when I moved us, I sold our house in the other town after 3 years. And at that point, he was so sick. And I was trying to figure out how, like, I decided let's bring him back to near my hometown, where we have family support and where it's closer to his family, where they can help him, because at this point I had learned enough from you that I knew that I couldn't help him and that other people were going to have to start pitching in. And I single-handedly moved us home, sold a beautiful house, and drove with him and 2 dogs in a car back to my hometown, 3-day drive with a breathalyzer in my purse. And I told him, I said, if I suspect anything that you're impaired and I request this breathalyzer, we will pull over and you will take it or you will let me drive. It was like, I was very firm and he agreed. And we got back, and at that point, my plan was we rented a house near my hometown, and my plan was I'm going to unpack the whole house so that he's comfortable, and then I'm going to leave him. Because at that point, I knew I couldn't live with him anymore. I wasn't ready to divorce him, but I knew I needed to leave him. I knew I needed space away from him. And it was just a few months later, I unpacked the whole house, and I was very strategic. And honestly, from the moment that I started planning, I'm going to call it my exit strategy from this marriage, it was a 14-month span from the time I sold the house in the other state to the time that I had him served for divorce. And every step of that was for me very strategic and meticulously followed. Also with the intent of him not discovering that I'm planning to leave. And I wasn't decided when I would leave and how I would leave, that kind of thing, but I was like, I knew I just needed to get away from him. And so when I left him, I got on a plane and went to the beach, 4 states away. My parents have a condo, and it was empty. And I was just so lucky to have that. And it was just to get away from him because I needed to heal. And literally, like, when I decided to do that I would leave him, it was to save myself. It's like time to save myself. Like, this was the first time that I had to really focus on putting myself first over his needs. And I was leaving a very sick man. And I was concerned because we had 2 dogs at home that needed care. And it got so bad for me in the house, even with all my boundaries and all of my ways of dealing with him. And I got really good at boundaries and taking care of myself and all of my self-care and all of the support I got from 7 people in my life who were there for me for everything. None of that could help relieve the tension in the air under my roof or the energy of addiction, like the negative energy that addiction, that surrounds addiction. Like, I didn't even walk in my living room. The energy in there was horrific, and he was very, very sick. And I knew I just needed space to take care of myself. And so I left and went to the beach, and I was there for about 6 months. And at the beach, I focused 100% on my self-care. I walked the beach 4 to 5 miles a day. That was my plan. I was filled with anger. I was filled with disappointment. I was filled with sadness. And I didn't want any of that settling in my body, and I didn't want to get sick from it. And so I have to process all the emotions. I have to face them, and let them flow through my system, but I needed to let them out. And that's how I did it. I was journaling. I had a therapist. I had 3 life coaches at once. I had the 7 friends. I did yoga. I meditated. I went to every sunset I could go to, took pictures, did a lot of photography, and really focused on me. And there was a very defining moment for me when I was toward the end of that 6 months at the beach that was my ultimate decision that I am going to follow through and divorce him. And there was some part of me while I was walking on the beach that was processing the anger and thinking maybe if he can get himself together, if he can find himself and get help, which he hadn't been really doing very much of. Like he would go to AA meetings and come home drunk from them. So like he would drink on the way home, so that he wasn't really doing the work. And some part of me when I was walking the beach was like, if he can figure this out, I'll consider holding out. But if I heard myself talk out loud to a friend and say, I've been dealing with this for 10 years, something inside of me was like, you know what? You've done enough. You've done enough. You've hung in there and been waiting for this man to change. And he's not going to change, and you can't help him. And now you know you can't help him. And I knew that me leaving him and going to the beach meant that all the other balls would drop. Like everything would fall apart that was left to fall apart. And it did. It absolutely did fall apart. And your program really helped me get ready for like the letting go part, like letting go of what I had, letting go of what I thought was the structure of my life. Like I'm married to this person and we have this, foundation that's supposed to be love, that's supposed to be like, a financial foundation, and we have a social foundation, and we have community, and we have work, and like all these good things. And I'm watching all of it implode, and I'm allowing. And now I'm ready. I'm like, you know what? If it all just comes apart, I'm going to be okay, because I'm okay. And then I had to be okay with that, like letting go of like the most beautiful house we'd ever lived in. And then when I got to the beach, I get to the beach on the first day. I go to the sunset. I wake up the next morning, and I'm like, I haven't had this kind of freedom in ages where I could just be with myself. And I take myself to lunch at my favorite restaurant, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I really just need this, And I come home at dinner time, and I get a phone call, and it's his boss, who I've never spoken to in my life. And his boss says to me, the paramedics are working on your husband right now, and he's had a grand mal seizure. And the paramedics would like to know some background about his health history. And he says, what can you tell me that I can relate to them? And that was the moment that I got to tell his boss that he had a problem with alcohol. And I was just thinking, why am I the one that has to do this? But the paramedics are working on him and they need to know this information. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it literally is two bosses went with him to the emergency room. And, my ex ended up in rehab, or my then husband. But what happened from that too was, here I am thinking I'm at the beach house. I'm, in my retreat mode, self-care mode, and all the attention goes back to him. Like the boss is like, we need his health insurance information. Then for the first time ever, I told his family. I called his family for the first time ever. I had kept them out of the loop intentionally because I was so overwhelmed myself that adding them in at that stage would have created additional noise in my life that I just couldn't deal with. But I told his family, I called them one to one, each one, and they were all supportive, but everybody's scattered all over the country. But like the whole next day is his AA sponsor is checking him into rehab, and we need health insurance information, and we need, all this stuff. And it was like, really? I just got to the beach, and this is supposed to be for me. And I'm still dealing with this man. Like addiction's still, getting my whole day. And, and it went on for about a week and a half of like chaos around that until like things settled. But one of the things was, we had 2 dogs at the time, and my mom took our older dog in, my parents did, and the younger dog, he happened to be in a kennel because we were both out of town. I had to have the younger dog rehomed. And because this dog was very high maintenance, and there's just no way that my husband at the time would be able to care for him. And it was like the saddest thing, that it was me or the dog. Like, I'm not coming home because of the dog. At this point, I'm still firmly holding my vision that I have to save myself. And if it's me or the dog, I'm choosing me. The dog had already showed that he didn't want to live with us anymore in so many ways. And I'm at peace with that, meaning I know he can go to a home where they can really be there for present to him. And I made arrangements with a shelter to make sure he got with a family that would be a really good match for him. And so, it was just a lot of stuff that I had to do in that moment. But once that all settled down, and I was able then to focus on me for the next 6 months, which I really did, at the beach. And that was all good. So about 6 months into that, I'm doing all my beach walks, and I'm getting healthy from the inside out, because literally when I arrived at the beach, I was just so, I have a photo of me on the beach, and you can see how tired my eyes are. You can see the sadness in my eyes. You can see I've just been through so much. At that point, I've been through 3 cross-country moves in a very short period of time, and and just dealing with so much. And I'm walking on the beach 6 months into that. It's a Saturday. And I'm going to tell you about when I knew it was time that I wanted to divorce my husband. So it's a beautiful day. I'm not even thinking about any of that. And I walk off the beach with a smile on my face, and I'm heading home, and just I'm looking forward to the afternoon. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to go out to eat. It's going to be this awesome Saturday. And I got a call from one of my husband's siblings, and they said, "We haven't heard from him in days, and we're trying to reach him." And I kind of call around other siblings, nobody's heard from him. And the truth is that based on some of my conversations with him, I thought that and because of his health conditions that were caused by alcoholism, he could have a medical event at any time that could kill him or impair him. And now he's not answering calls. And this was becoming kind of a trend. But this particular day, me coming off the beach, I was having such a great day, and I stopped in my tracks, I remember, in the middle of the street, and that was it. I'm that is the last time this man is going to wreck my day. That is the last time. That is it. I am done. That was it. There had been so much in almost 11 years leading up to that. But that last thing, because what happened from that was I should have just called the police and did do a wellness check, because that would deter him from, not answering his phone when people are reaching out. But my brother insisted on going in to check on him. And I think that was what kind of flipped that switch for me, because I said I didn't want my brother to do it. I said, I don't want you to do that because I'm really scared you're going to find a dead body. And I said, I don't want you to live with that, to have that image that you'll never be able to erase from your memory. I don't want you in therapy over this. I'm going to call the police. And he's like, nope. My brother's like, I'm going in. I'm like, no. And there's nothing I can stop. My brother has key to the house. He can get there. So he did it. And that was it. It was no, this is affecting my family. This is affecting me. It's affecting my day. And I'm not going to let it affect me ever again. I'm just done. And that was my decision. And I got a plane ticket for 3 weeks later back to the house that we were renting near my hometown with the idea that I already had my attorney lined up like a year before, and we've got the paperwork all ready to go, and I'm going to have him served. And I walk in the door of this house, and I take one look at him, and he's so sick and so drunk. And I know that, like, he's so much at risk of having a medical event. And long story short is I got him to the ER. And it took a hospital, they put him directly into the ICU, and it took the hospital 9 days to detox him. And then they sent him straight to rehab. And the beautiful thing about that was that he was safe now, and that I had the house to myself, and our lease was about to be up, and I could start packing, but again, I didn't want to have him served while he was in rehab, because there's some stuff around that he wasn't going to be, he was already, he was so impaired, his condition at that point, that this really smart man who had great business acumen and great judgment, in the last year, I'd watched his ability to reason was gone. His ability to think logically was gone. He was having memory issues. I was wondering if he was heading toward alcohol-induced dementia. I envisioned too that if I had stayed with this man, that I'd be a caretaker for him for the rest of my life, because he wasn't getting help. And I didn't want that for my life. And it was just really, and I care about him, so it was really scary. And my goal at that point was to pack up our house, let the lease expire, and send him to live with his family. Mm-hmm. And they willingly took him, but they were a little stressed, obviously, because they had suddenly had this big responsibility, they felt, and they were learning, all the things that took me years to learn, through your program or over time, they were having to learn in really short time how to deal with someone who's going through this. And at the same time, one of his family members was really angry at me, and I was dealing with that, and it was, but he and I have always had an ease of conversation. And even though he was furious with me, and I informed him while he was in rehab and he was having a meeting with his therapist, I prearranged with his therapist to join the meeting over the phone. And I think she knew what was coming. And I told her, and I said, I'm going to be telling him that I'm filing for divorce. But I thought, I'll do that while he's in rehab, while he's surrounded by support. And, but when he came home a week later from rehab, he walked in the door and he was going to give me the cold shoulder. He was very angry. And I understood that, and I let him just do that for about 24 hours. And I haven't lived with him now in about 8 months or something. And now we're under one roof only because I got to pack up the house because there's no one else well enough to do it. And I crossed paths with him the next day in the hall, and I said to him, divorce is challenging and stressful enough without making it more difficult under our roof here at home. And I said, I plan to treat you with kindness and respect through this whole process. I said, I did not hire a pit bull for an attorney. I'm looking just to split everything in half. I plan to not be contentious. And I'm going to treat you with respect and talk to you with respect the whole time we're here, and would love it if you would choose the same. And he just kind of stood there and looked at me and then he followed through on it. And so even though much of the time, even though he just gotten out of he'd been dry for 40 days at this point, because between the hospital and rehab, he did start drinking again while I was packing up the house. So things got pretty tense at times, and he was yelling at me a lot. But your program, again, I was grounded. I was prepared. I knew it wasn't about me. If he started yelling, I would detach in the moment, and I would and I started to have compassion for this man who's so sick, who can't figure out how to get well. And my method of detaching in the moment while he was screaming at me, which was often while I was packing the house, was to sort of like almost like I'm having an out of body experience. Like I'm looking down at the two of us in the kitchen, let's just say, and I'm observing it. And the reel that's going through my mind is, this is really sad that he's so sick that he feels like he needs to yell at me. Like I hear this man yelling. Like I'm not even really taking in his words, but the reel is saying, I'm sorry you're so sick. I wish you could get help. I can't help you. And I'm going to leave the room now. That's the quiet reel in my mind, and my method of detaching in the moment, with, of course, just leaving the room eventually if I can. But he would try to corner me while I'm making a meal or something, and it was hard to get out sometimes. But then I would just detach, and I was good about just treating him with respect. He was having a hard time with that once he started drinking again. But when in his dry moments, he would be respectful. And like 3 days before we both moved out of that house, there was a baseball game on TV, and he's sitting in the living room, and he's actually dry for the first time in weeks. And I think it's because he knows he's got to leave in 2 days, and he's got to get a few of his things together. I've packed all of his things, and he's sitting in the living room watching a game. And I hadn't sat in the living room with him in I don't know, a year and a half or something. Since I sat in the living room with my own husband. And I sat down in a chair nearby and watched the game with him. And we talked as if nothing was happening, as if there wasn't a divorce going on, as if we weren't both moving out in 3 days. And I think for him, he actually apologized to me at some point in one of those dry moments while I was trying to help him pack some of his things. He apologized for what he had done. He didn't get into specifics, but he just felt really bad about it. And, just like a reminder, for all of us, this is a good man who's struggling with a horrible disease. Mm-hmm. And he has his moments where he knows that he wishes he hadn't treated me in a certain way. He wishes it hadn't happened this way. And I had so much compassion that I wouldn't wish this disease on anyone. And to watch somebody go through it the way he's doing. And something in me had hope that by leaving, that I'm not leaving to do this, but that by leaving, maybe he'll get help. How many bottoms does he have to hit? Mm-hmm. He just didn't seem to have a bottom. It just keep getting worse, And okay, you lost your dog, you lost your house, you lost your wife, you lost your job, you lost, everything. And the good news, is we share custody of our very old dog, and we meet up every few months to exchange the dog, halfway between our homes, and we're 6 hours apart. And I kind of get to check in with him. We're literally standing in a parking lot, to exchange, and I check in with him. But he appears to be sober this year. And so something happened. I don't know the details of it. He said, someday I'll tell you. And I said, okay. So I'm not pushing on getting that information. I don't need that information. It's not mine. But if he wants to share, I would listen. And we do have long talks over our dog because our dog has some health issues. He's really old. So there have been times that we've had to spend time on the phone to work some things out. And always friendly, always, you know, he seems like an old friend. He like doesn't even seem like a guy I was married to. He just seems like an old friend. And I want the best for him. And yet still for me, I am still in my process, still learning, unlearning codependency behaviors. Like I learned how to have boundaries at home with him, and I did really well with that. But now how I take boundaries to work, how do I take boundaries to friendships? Because I never had them in my whole life before you taught me this, Michelle. And it's a process, and I am still not totally figured out how to put myself first. And I'm learning that. I'm working on it. And one of the big things with my small business is that I couldn't give it much attention for a long time, and now I'm giving it attention. And just giving it attention, giving something that I want to grow for myself is sometimes difficult. Like it's like I've spent so much time putting somebody else first, and not just in my marriage. And there were other times in my life where people were coming before me. Like I was putting others first, and it's a process. It's a long process, and I'm excited for the learning. I love learning, but you know, I'm not out of the woods yet. Like my life is fantastic. I have a small house that I rent for myself across from a lake. My friends are all in my life. My interests are alive and well. I have a boyfriend who understands everything that I went through, a wonderful person. And yet the process of rebuilding my business has really challenged me because I have to put myself first. And that like, I know I've done that at other times in my life, but it's sort of, it just to access that again, it's a process. The chaos that I lived in for the last 6 years before meant that there was no room for creativity anymore in my life. There was like no room for, you know, growing my business or making room for it. And there wasn't any room for me to cry. I had to learn how to cry again. Because if I cried in the presence of my husband, he would drink. And so it's almost like he trained me not to cry. Like my emotions weren't allowed. And, there's just like things that I've been working on, and I'm very happy. I'm at my foundation. The crazy thing is, even in like the ultimate chaos, when I'm living in other people's spaces and bouncing from guest bedroom to guest bedroom, and my whole life is in boxes for years, I'm still happy. Like, I would go with my family and my brother and my mom, and we would go like visit the botanic garden, and I'm out there taking pictures of flowers, and I'm just joyful. And my brother says, "How are you happy considering all the crap that you're going through right now? How is it that you're happy right now?" And I'm like, that was the self-care part, that even though my life was in disarray, I still, like, my foundation is happy. And it's up to me to make myself unhappy. And outside influences can influence my happiness, but it's really up to me to manage that. It's up to me to create my life. It's up to me to hold onto a vision that I held on really strongly through the whole process, that 14-month process of my exit strategy, just holding on really tight to my vision And my vision was, I want a life that's happy and free of this type of chaos. I want peace in my home. I want a beautiful environment. And I want a life partner who wants to have fun and, like, you know, is for sure is not an addict, and who just really wants to be present to me. And in my marriage, my husband couldn't be present to me anymore. He was long gone before the marriage was over. He was in the living room, but he was gone. And then addiction took him, and so I held on strongly to this vision. Like, you know, for a long time I was taking myself out to restaurants by myself, you know, and I'd look and I'd see other couples dining together, and I'd see them like all cozy and happy and talking, and I'm thinking, I want that. I don't have that right now, but that's what I want. And the house that I live in, this tiny little house, I call it the tiny house on the lake, and I had my eye on this house 2 years before I rented it. But, you know, like when you put it out there to the universe, it delivers. So my landlord that I was renting a house through with my then husband was a realtor. And I said, hey, if you ever see that house come open up the block, let me know. And he says to me, well, that's my best friend's house. And so when it came open, I was the first person he called. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect, like as far as I was living at one of my parents' homes and they needed to get out of there. And it was just like it all just kind of fell into place. And so to give hope to our sisters too, that if you hold strong to a powerful vision of what you want and you put it out there, things start to come together for you. And that, like, I feel like I have landed firmly on my 2 feet after all of that. And I feel like my life is fantastic. I am so happy with what I've created. And that anyone can do this. It's hard. The hardest part is when you're in it and you file for divorce and you're waiting for that divorce to happen, and the tension, and, you know, if you have to live with him at the time, that's the hard stuff. And addiction forces us in our situation to make the really tough decisions in life. But you can do it. You're strong enough. You can do it. And you will land on your feet, and you will create whatever you want to create. And I'm midlife. I'm in my mid-50s. And I know some of our sisters here, like that can be a really challenging time. If you're 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, your whole life had a structure, an order. Maybe your kids are out of the house. Maybe you have a beautiful home that you love. Maybe, you know, you're coming to like a place in your career that is like, you know, you've worked hard. Financially, things are a certain way for you. If you've created that structure and now you're faced with feeling like you're tearing it all down, that's daunting. And don't do it alone. Like, get help, like have friends, have coaches, have therapists, have attorneys, have people. Surround yourself with positive people and people who can help you through this, and you will get what you need to have everything you want. It's going to look different. It's going to feel different. It might cost different. It might, all of it, like it could be huge lifestyle changes, but if you're open to it, it's available. It's here, and I'm here, and I'm here to tell you that it can be done. And yeah.
Thank you so much. I cannot tell you how powerful that story is, your life story. So thank you so much for sharing this.
This podcast is created for your support, encouragement, and entertainment with my personal thoughts and beliefs. We are bonded together by the fact that we love someone suffering from addiction. This is not intended as a substitute for therapy or advice from a professional.